Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Brown, and my presentation today is on the letterforms that appear on classic American motor cars. For the last 10 years or so, I've been going to auto shows and auto museums and taking photographs of cars, but I don't photograph the whole car. Rather, my focus is on the graphics and the letterforms that appear on the exterior of the vehicle. In the spirit of full disclosure, I should let you know, though, I am not a professional photographer. For most of my career, I worked in corporate communications for Fortune 500 companies, initially as a graphic designer and art director, and then later as a writer and a communications director. A few years ago, I decided to go back to school and get a master's degree in graphic design. I wanted to explore design, not from a commercial perspective like I had throughout most of my career, but rather from a more theoretical one. In my design research class, I started to analyze these photographs that I had of classic motor cars, and I started to notice patterns. And it's these patterns I'd like to share with you today. The bulk of lettering we're going to look at today is from the 1950s and 60s. But before we delve into that, I think it's worthwhile to start at the beginning. Cars became commercially available to American consumers during the early years of the 20th century. These newfangled inventions, called horseless carriages initially, were a revolutionary replacement for the horse. Automobile manufacturers recognized they had to overcome consumer resistance and gain the public's trust in order to get people to buy a car. There were a couple of tactics they used to do this. Some manufacturers signed their product with the name of the inventor. You see examples of this here with Maxwell and Ford. Maxwell, of course, is no longer in business, but Ford still endorses its products with a version of this signature logo today. Other manufacturers co-opted historical references to lend familiarity and trustworthiness to their automobiles. When Chrysler formed the DeSoto division in 1928, they capitalized on the legends of the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto, who discovered the Mississippi River. That same year, Chrysler also launched the economically priced Plymouth brand. For decades, Plymouth leveraged an association with Plymouth Rock through images of the historic Mayflower. Chrysler and DeSoto weren't the only ones that looked to history for legitimacy. Pontiac proudly displayed representations of the Native American chieftain bearing the same name. The Cadillac logo was based on the family crest of its namesake, the alleged founder of Detroit. Although the emblem has been simplified greatly throughout the decades, it still maintains its roots with heraldry, even today. Prior to World War II, cars had almost no lettering on their exteriors. What type existed generally appeared as the manufacturer's logo on the radiator grille, or perhaps the hubcaps. LaSalle emblazoned the grille of their cars with a flowing monogram. Cord stamped shadow lettering into the hubcaps of some of its vehicles. Model names, it's worth noting, were rarely seen on cars until the 1930s. In general, model names were functional and not distinctive. For example, you've probably heard of the Ford Model T, but Ford was not the only car manufacturer with a Model T. Cadillac and Oldsmobile also had Model Ts in their lineup. Similarly, at least 5 manufacturers, Ford included, released Model As. Engine attributes sometimes performed double duty as model names, hence the Pontiac 6 and the Packard Super 8. Body styles were described in terms borrowed from the carriage trade: coupe, cabriolet, roadster, Victoria, and others. One of the first cars to market with evocative monikers was the Jordan Motor Car Company, with their release of the Playboy in 1919. Ned Jordan, Jordan's founder, was an ex-advertising man who recognized that people didn't buy cars based on mechanical features alone. Style and the way it made the driver feel were equally, if not more, important. The company's other models included the Tomboy and the Friendly 3. In the late 20s, Studebaker rebranded their models with names connoting leadership: the Commander, the President, and the unfortunately named Dictator. The Dictator model was abruptly canceled in 1937 as Hitler was gaining power. When Hudson decided to launch a low-cost car in the midst of the Depression, they christened it the Terraplane to take advantage of the public's fascination with aircraft. The car was adorned with a handsome hood ornament. While the model names of most pre-war automobiles were uninspired, the spirit of the brand often prevailed in hood ornaments. The first hood ornaments were actually radiator caps. Radiators of early cars were placed outside the hood at the front of the car. Owners liked to customize their vehicles with unique caps on their radiators. Manufacturers took note and began including specially designed caps as standard features on their automobiles. Here you see a modest radiator cap with the Ford logo, but other car makers were more adventurous. Eventually, radiators and their caps were concealed underneath the hood, but Detroit continued to festoon their autos with creative hood ornaments known as factory mascots. Chevrolet was just one of the automakers who portrayed birds in flight atop their automobiles. Beginning in the 1930s, Packard adopted a graceful pelican as their mascot. Some Ford models sported eagles. From 1926 to 1955, Pontiac hoods featured a series of sculptural renditions of their namesake. Most of the designs for these sculptures would have been created within General Motors' styling department run by Harley Earl. Some of the chieftains' likenesses were formed of amber plastic and illuminated from within. Cadillacs were identifiable in part due to the winged goddess floating atop their hoods. The first goddess debuted in 1930. Her form continued to evolve through the years, culminating in a streamlined abstraction in the 1950s. A plethora of spaceships, rockets, and airplanes embellished American automobiles by mid-century. All of this, however, came to a halt in the 1960s amidst safety concerns about hood ornaments and the resulting regulations that ensued. The US economy boomed following World War II, and auto manufacturers were among those who benefited. New car sales hit historic levels. Several factors contributed to this surge. Wartime rationing had created a pent-up demand, and consumers were willing to cash in their war bond savings. Consumerism was touted as a patriotic duty that created jobs and bolstered the economy. Returning soldiers were starting families and buying new homes in the suburbs with a GI Bill. Expanding highways made suburban living more viable. Although the first post-war cars reflected a dowdy pre-war sensibility, it wasn't long before fresh, buoyant automotive designs emerged. Detroit recognized style was an important selling point and went all out with design. The golden age of American automobiles was in full swing. Model names became an important component of automotive marketing after the war. Monikers evocative of the space age reflected the country's optimistic view of the future. Flight continued as a theme, connoting speed and freedom. The names of real or mythical birds grace the side panels of these classic autos. The storied Thunderbird debuted in 1955. In a similar manner, Pontiac named a series of 1950s concept cars after another feathered legend, the Firebird. Some monikers hinted at the promise of fun in the sun and relief from day-to-day drudgery. The Sunliner nameplate was affixed to several different convertibles in the Ford lineup. Throughout the 1950s, Oldsmobile applied the holiday placard to hardtop versions of the Olds 88 and 98 models. Certain brand names, like Cadillac and Lincoln, conveyed status, but model names also signaled the owner's buying power. Prestigious names were conspicuously applied to top-of-the-line models like the Chrysler Imperial, the Studebaker President, the Dodge Royal, and the Lincoln Premier. Some model names carried a worldly air. Examples include the New Yorker, the Saratoga, and the Metropolitan. The Bel Air, named after the exclusive LA enclave, has become an icon of the 1950s. The typescript changed multiple times throughout the model's history, but was generally rendered in distinctive scripts. Branding was often applied inconsistently by car manufacturers. The 1962 Ford Falcon Futura featured 3 different settings of the Futura name, none of which are really a faithful rendition of Paul Renner's 1927 typeface, Futura. Here are several versions of the Olds 88 moniker from different years. While the graphic treatments are varied, the shape of the numerals are mostly consistent. The industry term for all of this chrome is brightwork. Brightwork refers not just to the nameplates on the vehicles, but any reflective materials added to the car to enhance its appearance. 1950s cars glittered with brightwork, massive chrome bumpers, highly styled grills, decorative metal stripping, hood ornaments, nameplates, and logos. Powerful V8 engines were valued for performance, and manufacturers would tout their presence on the car's exterior. Here are several examples. Note the use of serifs on the DeSoto V8 brightwork. Serif letterforms are relatively uncommon in the automotive world. Racing flags have been a hallmark for Corvette ever since the first Vette hit the road in 1953. The graphic has morphed through the years. The original logo was created by Robert Bartholomew, a staff designer at Chevrolet. The first iteration included an American flag, but days before the official launch, the stars and stripes were removed when Chevy realized it was illegal to include the country's flag on a commercial product. A flag comprised of the French fleur-de-lis and the Chevy bow tie emblem took its place. In the 1960s, the flagpoles merged together to form a V. But Vettes aren't the only cars sporting racing flags. Chevrolet also used them on revved up versions of the Bel Air and the Impala. Ford displayed them on the sporty Thunderbird. Throughout the 1950s, script typefaces were trendy in advertising, perhaps in part because the emergence of photo typesetting made it easier to design fonts that connected the letters together, a feat that could be challenging to accomplish with metal type. Car nameplates made extensive use of casual script throughout the 50s and 60s. These lively type treatments conveyed a modern, easy living attitude prevalent in society. Manufacturing efficiency may have also played a role. Connecting letters together onto a single chrome plate likely saved production costs when compared to nameplates constructed from standalone letters. Some of these type treatments were not true scripts. Although the letters connected together, the shapes of the letters had more in common with typography than handwriting. In particular, notice the shape of the E and the R in these examples. The scripts were not always slanted. Sometimes they were upright, with individual letters connected along a flat, linear baseline. Generous letter spacing enhanced legibility from a distance, and it also helped to fill out the elongated, narrow surfaces of trunks and side panels. Here are two distinctive scripts found on a 1956 Plymouth Fury. The boomerang F on Fury seems to capture the essence of mid-century design. Slanted scripts could convey forward motion and speed. Letterforms for these treatments were often based on cursive styles. Cursive scripts graced a variety of automotive nameplates. All of the examples here gain energy from the exuberant thrust of the capital C. Formal scripts were sometimes used to signal prestige for high-end models in trim packages. The Grandee was a special edition Mustang. The DeVille and Eldorado were Cadillac models. Although script was popular in mid-century, other styles were also used, specifically sans serif, and to a much lesser extent, serif letterforms. Shown here, starting with the top row, is a hood ornament from a Ford Edsel, the Lincoln L, an emblem from a 1954 Studebaker designed by the famed Raymond Loewy and his team, the distinctive R from a 1957 Rambler, and some bright work from Mercury and a monogram on a Willys Jeepster. Sans serif type was the dominant style of type applied to early automobiles before World War II. It conveyed modernity and a technological edge. This type on the wheel of this Duesenberg is particularly handsome. Crosley was a short-lived automotive marquis. Powell Crosby Jr. had made his fortune manufacturing radios in the 1920s. Fittingly, it was the radio lightning bolt that held together the letters of the logo on his first car. The graphic treatment was distinctly Art Deco, even if it was impairing the legibility somewhat. In the early 1940s, several auto manufacturers opted for Art Deco type with an exaggerated thick and thin, reminiscent of the Broadway typeface designed by Morris Fuller Benton in the 1920s. After the war, linear baselines were sometimes used to hook together all-cap sans serif type treatments. Inlines also added dimension to the letterforms. Another popular approach was to letter space capital letters without a connecting baseline. All cap letters were sometimes set in a circle, especially when the type needed to accommodate the shape of the steering wheel or a gas cap. Serif type was seldom used. Lincoln Prestige is one of the few models that employed serifs. Interestingly, this type is held together by a horizontal rule that juts out as a ray from the star. By the early 1970s, foreign cars began to make headway in the US market. Detroit struggled to compete, reducing the size of cars and scaling back on bright work to curtail cost. The golden age of automobiles had reached a dead end. Type on cars became less creative. If you take a look at the top 10 models on the market today, you see those here on the screen. Not one of them uses serif type. Fortunately, since thousands of car buffs have restored the beauties from the 50s and 60s, they're still around to enjoy and admire. And that's it for my presentation today. I'd like to make a quick thank you to my graduate advisor at the University of Minnesota, Stephen McCarthy, and also to my husband who has encouraged and supported my photography. You can follow my car photography and other design explorations on Instagram at words+image. Thank you.